This plane lifts off the runway on March 8, 2014. On board, 239 people heading from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Nothing about this departure looks any different from 1,000 others that year. That's the radar blip, moving normally. And then, less than an hour in, it just stops. No warning. Gone. This is where the trail runs out. Over a decade later, this ocean is still the closest thing to an answer anyone has. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this is still one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in modern aviation, and why the search for this plane is still happening right now in 2026. Before we go further, I want to be upfront about something. This isn't a legend or a story someone made up around a campfire. This actually happened. 239 real people were on this flight, and their families are still, to this day, waiting for real answers that mostly don't exist. So everything you're about to see comes from the actual investigation, satellite data, radar records, official reports, and documented search operations. Where the official answer is genuinely, we don't know, I'm going to show you that too, instead of pretending there's a neater story here than there actually is. Because the strangest part of this case isn't that a plane disappeared. It's how much we actually do know, and how little of it adds up to a real explanation. This is what boarding looked like, completely routine. A midnight departure, a standard overnight route between two major cities, the kind of flight that happens every single day without incident. For the first 40 minutes, everything here is normal. Cruising altitude holds steady. Radio checks in on schedule. Nothing about this flight looks any different from any other Malaysia Airlines route that week. Then, less than an hour into the flight, air traffic control makes a routine call and gets nothing back. On its own, that's not necessarily alarming. Radio contact drops occasionally for mundane reasons. But then investigators notice something else. It's not just the radio going quiet either. This signal, the plane's transponder, the system that automatically broadcasts the aircraft's identity and position to air traffic control, was broadcasting steadily, right up until it just cuts. Not glitching, not degrading, just stopping completely all at once. From here, the official radio version of this story ends. Everything that comes next is reconstructed from somewhere else entirely. Military radar and a satellite system nobody expected to matter this much. Military radar catches something that shouldn't be happening. The aircraft doesn't continue toward Beijing. It turns almost the exact opposite direction, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula it had just left minutes earlier. At this point, a plane that dozens of people on the ground were still expecting to land in Beijing had already gone dark on primary radar, turned around, and was flying somewhere nobody could clearly track anymore. Here's the part of this story I think is the most genuinely strange. And it's not speculation. It's a real detail from the investigation that ended up being the key to almost everything that happened afterward. This is an Inmarsat satellite. Even with the transponder off, and even with no one on board using it directly, the aircraft's satellite communication equipment kept doing one
This was after midnight.
automatically in the background.
Most
Every
people on
hour,
board
a
would
brief
have had their
signal
mail
fires
and
between the aircraft and this satellite.
probably
Investigators call it a handshake. It wasn't sending location data on purpose. It was closer to a background check-in, similar to the kind of signal your phone sends to a cell tower even when you're not using it.
To achieve that
small,
term,
almost
the
meaningless
aircraft could not be
detail turned
used
out to matter
to be flown on the
enormously.
automatics of the aircraft.
By measuring the tiny
So you'd have
delay
to take
and
the autopilot
frequency
out.
shift in
The
each of
autopilot
these
would have
hourly
flown itself to
handshakes,
its programmed
investigators
destination,
worked
Beijing.
out roughly
It didn't.
how far
Someone
the plane was
reprogrammed
from
the flight
satellite
management
each
system
ping,
computers.
and which general direction it was likely traveling. The final handshake came in nearly 7 hours after takeoff. 7 hours on a flight that was only ever supposed to be in the air a little over 5. Based on that final signal and the pattern of the ones before it, investigators concluded the aircraft had continued flying for hours after losing contact and had ultimately come down somewhere in one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth, the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from where it was ever supposed to be. Which raises the question that still doesn't have a satisfying answer. What was happening in that cockpit during those missing hours that nobody on the ground had any way of knowing about? This is the part of the story where I have to be honest with you. There isn't a clean ending here. Investigators worked through almost every category of explanation: mechanical failure, a fire on board, a slow loss of cabin pressure that could have incapacitated everyone aboard while the plane continued flying on autopilot for hours afterward. And yes, the possibility of deliberate human action by someone with access to the controls. None of these were ever confirmed. None of them were ever fully ruled out either. This box is the one thing that could actually answer all of it. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, both of which are still somewhere on the ocean floor if they survived the impact at all. Without them, investigators simply don't have the information needed to say with certainty what sequence of events took this aircraft off its planned route and kept it flying for hours afterward. Somewhere in the gap between what the data proves and what actually happened in that cockpit, almost every theory about this flight lives. And that gap is exactly why, over a decade later, people are still talking about this case in a way they mostly aren't about other aviation disasters. Most air disasters, however tragic, eventually get an answer. A mechanical fault, a weather event, a documented sequence of failures that investigators can point to with confidence. This is one of the rare cases where the honest answer, even now, is we know roughly where it ended up. We don't know why. Here's the part a lot of people don't realize is still happening right now in 2026. This is Ocean Infinity, a marine robotics company that signed a no-find, no-fee agreement with Malaysia in March 2025, meaning they only get paid if they actually locate the wreckage. Using autonomous underwater drones capable of reaching depths of 6,000 meters, they identified a new 15,000 square kilometer search zone in the southern Indian Ocean, based on the latest analysis of drift patterns and satellite data. This drone descends into water most search equipment can't reach, mapping the ocean floor meter by meter across a search area roughly the size of a small country. The search ran in two phases, one from March 25th to 28th, 2025, and a longer one from the end of December 2025 into January 2026, together covering more than 7,000 square kilometers of seabed. On March 8th, 2026, the 12th anniversary of the disappearance, Malaysian officials confirmed what so many families had been dreading. The renewed search had come up empty again. No wreckage, no confirmed debris, years of advanced technology, and still nothing that pinpoints exactly where this aircraft is. But this shell might matter more than it looks. Scientists studying barnacles recovered from confirmed MH370 debris found that the chemical growth patterns inside the shells could, in theory, be read almost like a timestamp, potentially narrowing down where in the ocean the debris first entered the water. It's not a breakthrough yet, but it's one of the first genuinely new leads in years. As for the search itself, it didn't end. In June 2026, Malaysia's government extended its agreement with Ocean Infinity for another full year through June 2027, describing it as a continued commitment to finally give the victims' families some form of closure. And the families themselves have said publicly and repeatedly that they're not giving up either. 12 years later, they're still asking their government not to stop looking, and the government so far has agreed. So as of right now, in 2026, this isn't a decade-old cold case quietly fading into history. It's an active search, happening again this year for a plane that's been missing for over a decade. Somewhere under this water is a Boeing 777 that 239 families still think about every single day. And two black boxes that could probably answer almost every question in this video, still sitting wherever the ocean floor swallowed them over a decade ago. 12 years later, this is still unanswered. Most tragedies, however devastating, eventually explain themselves. This one, so far, hasn't. But somewhere out there right now, this ship is still looking. There are still crews out on that water, still surveying that seabed meter by meter, and there are still 239 families who haven't stopped asking. If the wreckage is ever found, I'll cover it the moment it happens. Until then, this remains one of the very few real mysteries in modern aviation that's still actively unsolved. If you want to see more real cases covered like this, carefully and based on what's actually documented, let me know in the comments and subscribe for the next one.